This is the Christian Circle podcast, and you're listening to Pamela Fernandez, where we have conversations about Christian living. Here's the show. Welcome to a new episode of the Christian Circle podcast. Today we have a new guest, Miss Catherine DiNuzzo, the author of The Catholic Guide Through Anxiety, who's going to talk to us a little bit about her book as well as going through anxiety. So, Catherine, tell us a little bit about yourself and your ministry.
Well, I've been in private practice as a licensed professional counselor for a number of years, longer than I'm going to admit, because then you would know about all the gray hair you can't see on the podcast, but there's a lot. So I've been doing that for a really long time. And then I decided that I felt like so many clients were missing some just very basic information that I felt would help so many people understand their own mental health and also the mental health of those who love them. And so I started working on a website called Sacred Heart Mental Wellness and found ways to incorporate very traditional Catholic strategies with also cognitive behavioral strategies, and just really tried to find ways to combine those both so that we could see that faith and science go hand in hand instead of them always feeling like they need to be separate.
You wrote the book, The Catholic Guide Through Anxiety, and what inspired you to write this? Was it something that you experienced personally, or was it through someone who was very close to you? And how did your faith shape that journey as you wrote it?
Yeah, so I'm not sure if you're familiar with what was going on with the world in 2020, but it was the summer of 2020, and I was watching the pandemic unfold. And I just realized that the mental health struggles were going to be very significant as this event unfolded and for years after. And I was in prayer, and God made it very clear that He wanted me to write this book, The Catholic Guide Through Anxiety. And like I think so many people do when God tells them, this is what I think you should do. I just looked at him in adoration and was thinking, no, I can't do that. Obviously, you don't know me. I'm not the best writer. I'm dyslexic. I just don't think I could actually write a book. And in just that very sweetness in my heart, he said, I do know you. I created you. And this book needs to be written to help other people understand anxiety. And I just really fought it for a while until I surrendered and I said, okay, Lord, you want me to write this book? You're going to have to help me. And I worked with other people who helped me to write it. That's the Meg Malone on the book. She helped put a lot of words to my thoughts. And I just felt that there needed to be a resource out there talking about anxiety from how our bodies were made. So much talks about what we should do about anxiety, but the very few books that explain in very simple, easy ways to understand what's actually happening when we feel anxious and why the strategies work. A lot of books will tell you things you should do, but they don't always explain the why behind them. And so I just felt very called to make a simple, easy to digest, very empowering book to help people understand anxiety for themselves. And also, I wrote it for those who love someone with anxiety, who come into my office so frequently and say, well, I'm trying to love my daughter who has anxiety, and every time I say something, I say the wrong thing. And they tell me what they say, and I'm like, yep, that probably is the wrong thing to say to someone with anxiety. So I've learned how to really speak to a way that helps people with anxiety feel seen and also be able to get help. And so I tried to incorporate all of those themes into the book and just felt like it was needed in the time of our world, that what we were going through.
Given that most Christians basically believe in the presence of Christ, the presence of God with us all the time, we all experience some amount of anxiety. But why is this becoming such a widespread issue today?
Well, I just think our world is really full of unknowns.
Mm.
And I feel that if you boil down so many anxious thoughts, there's kind of two themes that we tend to have. One is that I'm not enough. I'm not tall enough, short enough, blonde enough, brown hair enough. old enough, young enough, whatever it is, the world really sells us that we're not enough.
Mm.
And trying to thrive to be enough can really create anxiety. Um, and then also just the world teaches us, especially nowadays, that if we just plan everything correctly, nothing bad will happen. I tease a lot of my clients sometimes about how ingrained this is into us now, with technology and different things with social media. Because back in the day when I was a kid, I would go looking for a restaurant to eat with my parents, and I sit in the back of the car and we would just look at the different restaurants as
Mm.
we drove past and we would pick one. And nowadays, you don't go to a restaurant if you haven't Googled it. You haven't checked out the reviews. You haven't looked at the menu. Like you already know what you're getting.
Yeah.
And it's just a really small example of how the world keeps telling us that we need to know everything before we take a step,
Mm.
that everything will be okay if we just know and plan and can control. And that's really a lie of the evil one to keep us stuck. And yes, the Lord is with us, whispering in our ears, like, I made you enough. You are mine. Surrender to me. I will make sure that that you are protected and you are loved and you are known, and trust in me. But unfortunately, we live in a world where the other voices tend to be so much louder and brighter and harder to sift out, to hear the voice of the Lord that's with us all the time.
I know that in this very busy world right now, a lot of people they're not really very frequent with the sacraments. Can you talk about the role of having an active prayer life or being an active practicing Catholic, the sacraments have in healing from anxiety?
Yeah, and I think that so often it's hard to have a prayer life because God is so amazing and powerful. And I like to think of him as this bright light that we just don't feel worthy of him. I
Mm.
don't want to bother him with my problems. I like to come to him with all the answers, and or maybe I'm just not enough. I'm not good enough for him. And one of the things I really strive to see in the book is how much God just desires our presence. Um, the little things, the big things, all of the sacraments, prayer is not that the Lord needs us,
Mm.
it's that he knows that we need him. And so he makes these beautiful invitations for us to rest in his arms, to come to him with our struggles. Um, and I think that we sometimes focus, especially people with anxiety, that we just want to do it right. And if I can't do it right, I don't want to do it at all. And that really keeps us from any types of the sacraments or prayer because we have such this high expectation. When I like to imagine the Lord similar to how I feel about my children, and I have four teenagers and they're all going different ways and living their, somewhat independent lives.
Mm.
And when they take 2 minutes to say, Hey, mom, guess what I did today? It's the best feeling in the world.
Mm.
When they actually take a minute to have a dinner with me and I get their time, they can do anything in those meals. And I'm just so excited to be in their presence. And sometimes I just have to remind myself that the Lord feels the same way about me. That when I go to Mass, yes, I gain the graces, but I also am giving favor to Him because I'm there with Him,
Mm.
letting Him into my life, surrendering that to Him. And I think the more that we can, as faithful people, remember how much the Lord just wants into our lives, the easier it is to come into prayer and into the sacraments.
So I actually love that you said that we need the Lord. So what are some specific spiritual practices that you recommend for someone who is battling anxiety? In your experience, whatever has worked, can you recommend something?
The beginning of my book, the very first challenge that I give to anyone who reads my book is that by the end of the book, you'll be able to thank the Lord for your anxiety.
Mm.
And anyone who's ever suffered from anxiety, most of your listeners probably right now are laughing, going, Haha, she doesn't know anything about anxiety. There's no way I would ever thank the Lord for my anxiety. But when we better understand how it's a physical response that the Lord gave us to keep us safe in times of danger, just sometimes our brains think we're in danger when we're not actually in danger. It allows us in those moments of anxiety to actually stop and thank the Lord for our anxiety, for loving us enough to try to keep us safe in all things. And then I ask Him to help me to surrender and to calm my heart so that I can feel His peace. And so, what I talk about this in the book is a term I call the hamster wheel. Is that often when we feel anxious, we start to feel the physical signs of anxiety. And then we start to feel anxious that we're anxious. And then we can't stop it. So we're anxious that we're anxious that we're anxious. And it just keeps growing and growing.
Yeah.
And so when we're able to step off that hamster wheel and to thank the Lord and to know that we aren't bad because we're having these feelings, we are not weak. We aren't whatever lie is going through our mind at that moment, that God created us good and He's with us. I truly feel that's the first step to being able to do all the other strategies that are in the book. But being able to stop and say that prayer and to know that you aren't bad or weak and that to bring the Lord into those moments of anxiety so you're not fighting them alone is truly the most powerful first step that you can do.
And what about confession? I mean, in many ways, talking to a therapist sometimes, at least in some way, talking to a priest can also help. But here you recognize Jesus in the confessional. So do you see confession as a healing tool for anxiety? And if so, how?
Well, it's absolutely healing. And I think that it's important to just kind of give this disclaimer that there are beautiful spiritual healings and graces that come from confession. And I
Mhm.
am not minimizing those at all. But at the same time, I really like to talk about the physical feelings and the things that happen to us mentally that happen when we're in confession. And so one of the reasons that confession is such a healthy part of mental wellness is that it enables us to claim it. Like a lot of times, if you were looking into secular mental health, they'll say you have to say the things out loud
Mm.
and then you need to let them go. And confession is this beautiful spiritually letting it go and like making things right with you and the Lord. But it also is a way of you giving yourself permission to allow those things from your past. And sometimes confession is hurts that have happened to you, things that you've done to others. It's a place where you take those things that are just weighing you down. I call them the books in your book bag that get so heavy they're hurting your back at the end of the day. You're able to release yourself of those and you start to feel the peace of not carrying those around emotionally and just weighing you down anymore. And there's studies after studies that say that people who frequent confession tend to have a stronger mental health in general because they're not carrying the weights of all of those things that most people carry around with them.
So just to demarcate now, there are a lot of people with anxiety. How do you differentiate between somebody who this is becoming a problem and needs to go to therapy versus somebody who, well, is in a healthy state of anxiety and just needs to trust the Lord more?
Yeah, the way that I describe it for my clients is that I don't want anxiety to make your life decisions for you.
Mm.
When anxiety is making the decisions for you instead of you making the decisions for yourself, that's when anxiety has become not properly ordered. So I will say disordered, but not like a disorder, not properly ordered in your life. And what's really hard if you've ever struggled with anxiety, those lies that anxiety say are just very convincing. And sometimes when you keep them in your head to yourself, it's very hard to see the truth in them because you're kind of spinning them in your own head. And so when anxiety is changing the people you see, the things you do, the decisions you make, then that's when I really recommend that you need to get a little more help to deal with your anxiety.
Another thing that I think I had wanted to ask you was in the Catholic Church, we believe a lot in redemptive suffering, right? So
Mhm.
there are lots of saints who have gone through this where they will take on a cross, bear it willingly, in exchange for, the salvation of souls or whatever. Now, what is the difference between this redemptive suffering and unhealthy emotional suffering?
Ooh, that's a really good question. And from my experience, I would honestly say I don't know if there really is a difference. I
Mhm.
think that we as Catholics, and I think that this probably goes past just Catholics, but I see it a lot because that's who I work the most with Catholics, is that we have this idea that when Jesus went up Calvary, he picked up his cross and he skipped his way up there. That we took this very hard cross and he was just joyous about it. And he wasn't.
Yeah,
He was in the garden, sweating blood, begging his father for this cup to pass from him.
yeah.
He fell, he needed help. Was physically, emotionally just like giving his all. It was very hard.
Mhm.
And again, I try to keep things light with my clients and in my talks and book. And so one of the things I always say is if it's good enough for Jesus, it's good enough for you.
Mm.
And Jesus suffered with his cross.
Yeah.
He carried it and he did what God asked him to, but it wasn't easy. It wasn't, he had peace, but I don't think it wasn't joyous.
Mm.
And so, yes, when we're able to take our suffering and offer it for someone else, when we're able to give it to the Lord to help others, absolutely, it gives us purpose in our suffering.
Mm.
When Jesus was going up to die on the cross, he knew who he was doing it for. He loved who he was doing it for. And that's what kind of gives you that peace. And so I think the difference is when we just suffer for the sake of suffering, it can feel very lonely and isolating and just impossible to bear. But when we can see a purpose in our suffering, which the Lord allows us to give purpose to our suffering, then carrying our cross becomes easier and more peaceful. And I think we can free ourselves from the expectation of it being joyous or easy, or that feeling of like, well, if you're having a hard time or it's hard for you, then you're not carrying your cross well. And I just don't feel like that's really what the Lord showed us in his own carrying of his cross.
So, when it comes to Catholic parishes now, how can they better support those who are struggling with anxiety or even mental health in general? There seems to be a gap. How can parishes better address this and support this?
Yeah, and I think this is a little hard for me to answer because I don't want to self-publicize,
Mhm.
but this has actually just been on my heart and is a big part of my ministry
Mhm.
right now because I actually feel it's very hard for parishes to do it because a lot of people aren't trained on
Mm.
how to do it.
Yeah.
And so one of the reasons I wrote the book and hopes that I had for the book is that parishes would consider buying it for their parishioners,
Mm.
one per family, because
Mm.
it's a very simple book. It's a book that could be at the confessional to, give people inspiration and knowledge and incorporate the faith in a beautiful way. And so I think we need to find ways to inform people of the truth because the lies are so loud. We have to see that as part of our catechesis and our evangelization is teaching about mental health and also how it incorporates with our faith in our churches. And then the other thing I think we really need to do, and this is a service that I'm starting to offer in the fall, which is actually going to parishes and schools and training people on how to handle mental wellness. And
Mm.
because those teachers and those parish staff and the volunteers, they're all on the first line of their
Mm.
own mental health and of those of the parishioners. And I feel like we need to offer more training so that they understand their own health, mental health, and also how do I handle the anxiety of others? How do I help someone who's going through a trauma? Because there's just not a lot of good information out there that's useful and very easy to obtain and to understand and to share. So, those are things I think need to happen. And since I know there's not a lot out there, I've started going to churches and doing parishes and diocesan trainings to
Mm.
try to help the staff better understand what mental health and mental wellness can be and how to support their staff and their parishioners better.
And I think this would be great for those who have been thinking about their vocation, like consider, becoming a Catholic therapist if you don't know what to do with your life, or if you feel like there's where should I plug the gap? Where should I stand in the gap? I think this is one area that we probably would need a lot more people in the future.
Absolutely. And there are a lot of really great programs out there. And I don't know anyone of the older generation who have been doing Catholic therapy for a long time are not very worried about the future and hoping that there's someone to replace us in retirement. And we all have very long waiting lists. And
Mhm.
yes, I would agree that this is a definite need, and it's a beautiful service when you can walk with someone and see the healing that the Lord is doing. I am adamant that I am just an instrument in my sessions, and I try to allow the Holy Spirit to really guide what we're doing. But it's the coolest spot to see. I tell my clients I have the best job ever because my job is to help people know that God loves them and heal the wounds that make it hard to believe.
So you're doing a fantastic job, and it seems like you love what you do. So what role do you or even Catholic therapists play in the life of the church today? You spoke about teaching, you spoke about training, you spoke about doing the therapy as well. So what are the roles that Catholic therapists can play in the church?
Well, I think we have to keep pushing our voices and advocating for mental wellness education.
Mm.
We every therapist that I know is we have a practice, but we also try to support our parish in when there's crises or when we join a book club, or we, various ways that we help support in the background. But I think that unfortunately, mental health is a topic that everyone knows needs to be addressed.
Mm.
And at the same time, they're still afraid to address it. It's very interesting to me how it's still very hard to be a speaker at a conference or to convince a parish to have you come speak about mental health, because they say, well, that's really heavy and it's scary and I don't want it to be too much for my parishioners. And I just lovingly feel like we as counselors have to keep kind of pushing it and saying, like, this needs to happen. We have to not be afraid of talking about mental health. And the more resources and support we can give a parish, the stronger their mental health will be as a whole.
So, Catherine, do you have any last words of advice for anybody who's going through anxiety right now, or any tips, your words of wisdom?
The fact that you're listening to this podcast is a great first step. And I would just encourage you to know that you are not bad. You are not crazy. You are not weak. That suffering from anxiety is not, again, something that is bad about you. And to not be afraid to learn more about anxiety, to get the resources to help you to navigate what are rational fears, what are irrational fears, what are ways to calm your animal fight or flight part of your brain, and that there is hope out there. Because again, the lie of anxiety tells you, I've always felt this way and I'm never going to not feel this way. And I can tell you, for someone who's worked with anxiety for 20 years, that there is freedom in anxiety and it is a beautiful place. And don't be afraid to get help if you need it to feel that peace.
So, where can people find you online? Where can they reach out to you or even buy your book?
So my book is you can get it on Amazon, The Catholic Guide Through Anxiety. And then you can also go to my website, which is sacredheartmentalwellness.com. Again, that's sacredheartmentalwellness.com. And on that website, you can get my book. You can also get videos. I have an understanding what is mental wellness video. I have an understanding the biology of anxiety video. I also have merch. I sell a sticker that says, "Don't be a bully to yourself," which I think is a very powerful reminder for those who have struggles with anxieties. We tend to say things to ourselves that we wouldn't say to anyone else. Also, on that site, there's a free mental wellness assessment that you can take to see kind of where you are on the spectrum of mental wellness. There's a place to book me to come to your parish to run a retreat. I do talks, I do conferences, I also do trainings. And so there's a page there to book me to come to your parish. And really on that website, there's just tons of also free resources and other podcasts I've been on to learn about various parts of anxiety and mental wellness.
Great. So thank you so much, Catherine, for joining us on this podcast. I wish you and your ministry all the very best.
Thank you.